Welcome to our final session of the day at our SQE conference. Well done to those of you who have stuck with us for the day and endured my voice for several hours. You deserve a medal. But we've got a great panel of speakers for our last session on qualifying work experience. I'll introduce Mary, Lucy, Claire and Nicole properly, more fully in a bit. But first up, we're going to hear from Richard Williams, who's a policy manager here at the SRA. He's going to kick things off by reminding people what our approach is to qualifying work experience and the key details around that. As you know, we need to abbreviate everything here, so people may refer to QWE at points, so that's qualifying work experience. And to introduce Richard, he's been at the SRA since 2012. He's done a range of work, including pushing through our continuing competence reforms. He's one of our leads on our work on qualifying work experience, so there's no better person to talk about it. And he's been developing resources, going out meeting people to find out what they need to help people understand what's required from qualifying work experience. And before Richard starts, a final shout out that you can submit questions by clicking on the link below. In the format of this session, we have left quite a bit of time for questions, so we'd love to hear what you want to know. But otherwise, I'll hand over to Richard now.
Thanks, Ben. I just wanted to start by saying that actually we know from today and the engagement work that Ben has mentioned that there are lots of people who are interested in qualifying work experience, and that ranges from potential candidates who are interested in knowing what qualifying work experience is and how they can accumulate it. Organisations, both regulated and organisations we don't regulate, who are interested in providing qualifying work experience placements, and organisations who are trying to help people understand what it is we're asking for in terms of qualifying work experience. So we know there's lots of questions and issues that are kind of surfacing. So hopefully my session will help kind of unpick and give some clarity as to what the answers are in our position. I wanted to spend the majority of the session really going through and pulling out the key themes of guidance which we issued at the back end of last week. Now, that guidance covers signing off qualifying work experience and what our expectations are in terms of what a good qualifying experience placement looks like. But before I do that, I just wanted to spend a minute or so just to recap on what qualifying work experience is. So from the 1st of September 2021, to qualify as a solicitor, an individual will need to have undertaken a period of experience of providing legal services that enables an individual to develop some or all of the competencies outlined in the Statement of Solicitor Competence. And the key point here is that with those competencies, through qualifying work experience, which will be assessed as part of SQE2. The second point is that qualifying work experience is at least 2 years working full-time or equivalent on a part-time basis. Now, we've been quite clear, we don't want to prescribe what full-time or part-time looks like. We know organisations and employers have their own metrics around that, and actually that's fine for us. The third, I suppose, ingredient of qualifying work experience is that it can be obtained in up to 4 organisations providing legal services. We won't stipulate the length of each of those placements, though, but it has to be up to 4 in total. Can we have the next slide, please? Qualifying work experience will need to be confirmed by a solicitor or compliance officer for legal practice. Now, just to point out, and I'll come on to this a little bit later, that actually that can be a solicitor or CULP within the organisation where the experience has taken place, but it can also be a solicitor who works outside of the organisation where the placement's taking place. And as you can see on the slide there, it can be attained in England or Wales or overseas. As I've mentioned, in an organisation we do or don't regulate, and it can be claimed from a current or a previous role. So can we have the next slide, please? So we know from today's session that there's been quite a few questions that have come through about sign off of qualifying work experience and what does it involve. So this slide should really kind of help clarify some of those questions. As I mentioned at the very start, we've issued guidance on what we expect from solicitors or CULPs signing off qualifying work experience, and that's on our website. And what that aims to do is really set out what we expect very clearly from individuals signing off qualifying work experience. I think the first point, though, really is just to kind of reiterate that sign off is not about assessing whether an individual is competent to practice as a solicitor. That's not a solicitor's or CULP's role. That's our role as a regulator, and that's what the SQE is designed to do on our behalf. A solicitor or CULP should really consider the next few points in signing off. And again, this is in our guidance. So we're very clear that the default position for a solicitor or CULP is that qualifying work experience should be confirmed if it has met the criteria I've mentioned on the previous slides. So if it's met those criteria, then it is qualifying work experience and it should be signed off. In signing off qualifying work experience, a solicitor or CULP should also take steps to satisfy themselves that whatever is being claimed for is accurate. And a solicitor or CULP might want to do that by looking at a learning and development record, for example, or they might want to check, an organisation's HR systems to check the details of the placement. And I think that's a good opportunity for me to mention what it is a solicitor or CULP is signing off. And what it is that they're confirming the details of the placement. They are confirming that the placement provided the opportunity for the individual to have exposure to some or all of the competencies outlined in the statement of solicitor competence, and also that the no character and suitability issues arose from that period. So again, lots of ways you can check that within your organisation and really get those assurances that the details that you're signing off are indeed accurate. I think the final point around confirming qualifying work experience that I'd like to pull out is that obviously, solicitors and CULPs, they are regulated by us. They have regulatory obligations, and we would expect those regulatory obligations to be followed in the context of qualifying work experience. So if I give you an example, perhaps that kind of will make it more tangible. So if a solicitor or CULP is deliberately refusing to sign off qualifying work experience that has met the criteria, then that may well be a breach of our regulations, and we may well take action against an individual in those circumstances. So just to point out, there is this kind of overarching regulatory obligation to kind of act honestly, fairly at all times, and not abuse your position in terms of that relationship with someone undertaking qualifying work experience. So if we can move on to the next slide. So again, there's been quite a few questions that have come up today around, what does good quality qualifying work experience look like? And we know some stakeholders are concerned that certain candidates may not get the best qualifying work experience opportunity. And we're really keen and committed to making sure that we do everything we can to ensure that everyone gets a good opportunity to experience the full range of competencies in a qualifying work experience placement. So again, we've issued guidance on this. It's on our website. We have guidance for organisations we regulate, but also guidance for organisations that we don't regulate who may well be offering qualifying work experience. Again, I just wanted to pull out a few points as to what we think good looks like. I think the first point really is around making sure that an individual has a good opportunity to be exposed to a diverse and varied work that enables them to gain exposure to the competencies that will be assessed in SQE2. The second point really is that we would expect any qualifying work experience placement to have support mechanisms in place, and that an individual is effectively supervised. So in terms of support, that might be kind of understanding what the individual wants to achieve from their qualifying work experience placement. What are their career aspirations? Giving them support in collating any relevant evidence that they might need at the point where qualifying work experience is signed off. And again, in terms of what I suppose good supervision looks like, and lots of organisations will already have these systems and processes in place, it's really about giving opportunity for individuals to be effectively supervised, and that they have opportunities to reflect and think about how their placement's progressing in relation to some of the exposure to those competencies, but also their kind of career aspirations. And the final point there is really around, a good placement should make sure that individuals have exposure to professionalism and ethical issues, and that might well include exposure to kind of ethical and professional role models as part of their placement. So, that gives you a kind of a sense of what a good qualifying work experience placement should look like. If we could have the next slide, please. And again, in terms of what good looks like, there are wider obligations we place on solicitors who might be supervising an individual and firms to make sure that they are effectively supervising, effectively supporting individuals, and again, not taking advantage of them. For example, deliberately restricting the work of an individual so they don't get that kind of exposure to a wide range of work that can help them pass the SQE2. And again, that might well be a regulatory matter for us to look into. So again, in terms of my final slide, I'd like to just quickly give you kind of a sort of heads up and a direction of travel about where we're going over the next sort of 12 months in relation to qualifying work experience, but also how we as the SRA will make sure that we're trying to kind of keep abreast of what's happening in terms of qualifying work experience and what's happening on the ground. So qualifying work experience is going to take a central part of our wider SQE evaluation. Once it's launched, we'll do two things. One, on an annual basis, we'll carry out a survey with individuals who have and are in the process of kind of obtaining their qualifying work experience to understand what's happening on the ground for them. And that will enable us to identify kind of any risks or challenges with qualifying work experience. And secondly, we'll do a much deeper dive into qualifying work experience through our broader SQE evaluation. We'll also set up a community of interest. We're really keen that we give as much support to organisations who are considering offering a qualifying work experience placement, and we feel we can best do that through establishing a community of interest. Hopefully that will be sort of face to face, but we'll have to see where we end up in terms of the current kind of pandemic. And that's really an opportunity for organisations to get together, to share ideas, share thinking, share experiences, raise issues, concerns with each other and with us as to kind of how they go about offering qualifying work experience. And that's something we're looking at potentially delivering collaboratively with the Law Society. I think that's a really good opportunity for us to do something kind of concrete and collaborative together to support firms and wider organisations. Kind of later on in 2021, we'll look at introducing a qualifying work experience hotline, and that will be a dedicated line at the SRA where candidates or individuals who are undertaking qualifying work experience can contact us and to raise any issues or concerns that they might have with their particular placement. And finally, it's just a quick reminder that actually if you're kind of using your current experience or previous experience, that from spring 2021, you'll be able to register that experience with us. So hopefully that gives you a very quick overview of the kind of mechanisms and measures for how we're going to kind of manage and monitor quality of qualifying work experience, but also give you a sense of kind of where we are going with it. And just a final point, that I'll make is actually, we're committed to also producing much more resources, and we've got a very clear plan as to what we'll be doing in terms of qualifying work experience resources going forward. But today's an opportunity for you to raise any particular issues that you'd like to see us addressing with resources. So I think that's it for me, Ben. A bit of a whistle-stop tour there, but this information and guidance is available on our website if people want to look into it in more detail.
Thank you, Richard. That was great. And it's interesting to see how that conversation has moved on since we did this event last year. I remember sitting in a room in Manchester where I know a number of training providers and people like the Junior Lawyers Division raised some of the concerns around sort of how we assess quality of what the expectations are around quality of qualifying work experience. So it's interesting to see how that has shaped what we've done in the last year. Now, we're going to hear from our panellists now. I've given them each a couple of minutes to share their reflections on qualifying work experience and perhaps how they plan to take advantage of some of the opportunities. First off, we have Mary Bonsour, who is co-founder of Flex Legal. She is a solicitor. She was a property litigator in a top city firm. I think she set up FLEX, as it's then called, in 2016. And that's a platform that connects pre-vetted lawyers and law students to firms and organisations looking for legal support. Mary, I'm sure, would be very modest, but she has won a string of awards from Legal Supplier of the Year to Entrepreneur of the Year. But I also think she wins the award for Hero of the Day because actually she's due to have a baby very shortly. So we really appreciate her joining us. And she's saying that certainly more than one Mary having a baby at Christmas matters. So thank you, Mary, for joining us. Do let us know if you need to rush off, but over to you to share your thoughts.
Thank you so much, Ben, and thank you to the SRA for having me here today. I'll try not go into labour over the next 45 minutes, so bear with me. So qualifying work experience, this is sort of very much in what we do at Flex. Our whole emphasis at Flex Legal is to connect, as Ben said, law firms and in-house legal teams to law students who build up their paralegal experience at the moment in the hope to get a training contract. So the SQE and in particular QWE offers a real opportunity for us to allow the paralegals who work through us to build up their QWE through the work placements that we do. And why I'm a big fan of the SQE and QWE is the bottleneck of 25,000 law students for 5,000 training contract places is just such a huge discrepancy. And we see so many very competent law students getting stuck because of this barrier of not being able to get a training contract. So that QWE and SQE really offers an opportunity for paralegals to build their own training contracts, whether that's through placements in-house, through smaller law firms, through their paralegal work with long placements that they might do for 6 months in bigger law firms. It's completely down really to the paralegal now to begin to build it up themselves and choose which areas they want to specialise in, and begin to focus and put the power a little bit into the law students' hands. A few things we're doing at Flex to really promote this is we are building a qualifying work experience diary where all paralegals will be able to record the work experience that they do against the competency statement. So the SRA have given put up a Word document to use as a kind of example way to record your qualifying work experience. We've taken it one step further and made it digital and actually compared it to the competency statement so that all your work that you do can be recorded against which competencies you're meeting in the competency statement, and is a more self-reflective diary of the competencies you've got, the competencies that you're missing, and also the time against it. You won't have to be signed up to Flex to have this. It will be free for any law student who wants it, and we are also offering it to providers as well who can buy licenses to track this. My kind of final point would be, I suppose, which Richard touched on, which is what is good qualifying work experience. And for me, it's really important that law students and people who have paralegals in have upfront conversations about what the work is that they're doing and whether it meets the competencies in the competency statement before someone joins. And that communication channel is going to become even more important, because otherwise law firms will get paralegals saying, why aren't you signing off on this? And look, I've met these competencies, as well as law firms saying, no, this isn't a competency in the competency statement. So my kind of big bit of advice would be, have those conversations before people join, and keep a really good record, if you're a law student, of what competencies you think you're meeting. And hopefully our diary will be able to help you with that.
Thank you ever so much, Mary. That was great. And I think, yes, that last point is very much echoed in our guidance around the importance of upfront conversations. That's vital, both from an employer perspective and a candidate perspective. And I could already see some questions coming in on those sort of questions. So we'll perhaps pick those up with Richard after these introductions. So next up, we're going to come to Lucy Blackburn, who is a senior lecturer at the School of Law and Social Science at the University of Central Lancashire. She teaches on both the law degree and the LPC. She is a solicitor and she's a supervisor in the law school's free law clinic. She's written extensively on law clinics and is also a trustee of the Clinical Legal Education Organisation, which some people called CLEO. So Lucy, over to you to share your thoughts.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you for the opportunity to come and speak this afternoon. I should just mention that I'm part of the School of Justice from the University of Central Lancashire. So just to clear that up. So with the advent of the new route to qualification, time spent in university law clinics can now amount to QWE. And to frame this in some context, around 75% of all UK law schools are running some form of pro bono or clinical legal education initiative. And then further within these law schools to running these initiatives, there can be numerous clinics that are running within one school. And these clinics may or may not be integrated into the curriculum. So they may or may not be awarding students credits. I would say by allowing the time spent in these clinics to be counted as QWE, this does acknowledge the very important work that students are undertaking in providing access to justice to many who can't afford to pay for legal services. However, there are a number of challenges faced solely by clinics when deciding whether or not they can offer QWE. CLEO, the Clinical Legal Education Organisation, we are producing guidance to help law clinics navigate QWE, but I do welcome the opportunity to look at discussing some of these challenges within this session today.
Thank you ever so much, Lucy. That was great. And next, we're going to move on to Claire Collins, who is Head of Learning and Development and Head of Emerging Talent at DWF Law, where she focuses on attracting and nurturing new diverse talent into the profession. A HR professional with almost 2 decades worth of experience in legal services, Claire is also in the final year of an MBA with the Open University. And she says she is delighted that means she can still get a student discount at age 50. Thank you for being the first panelist today to share their age. If only everyone else was more open about that. I suppose in the spirit of openness, I recently turned 40, which at least was a surprise to one Sainsbury's worker who challenged me buying a Taste the Difference beer recently. And I actually had no ID on me, and my alibi of having £150 worth of other shopping on the conveyor belt was not good enough alibi. So there we go. But enough of that, and over to you, Claire.
Hi, thanks, Ben. So yeah, I'm here to speak specifically from the perspective of someone who works within a legal business. I think the SQE is, well, I've always seen it as a great opportunity actually to do things differently. And certainly in a business like DWF, where we have, as well as a large commercial division and insurance division, we have managed services. We also have something called Connected, which provides additional services, legal services to our clients. So for us, something like the SQE means that very quickly we can start to match the work experience and the trainee so that they are becoming specialist and gaining the skills that we know they'll need in the role that they're going to qualify into. So I definitely think it's a great opportunity for a lot of businesses. I do also think there are some challenges to do with the change, and some things just for people in a legal business to be aware of. And those things for me are primarily around educating your legal team, your recruitment teams rather, so that when you are looking for talent and you look at CVs, recognising that there'll be more ways to qualify and that an SQE route will not be like for like to an LPC route. And I think you just need to make people aware of that, and also that the qualifying work experience as well will be more diverse. So I think that's very positive in a way, because there'll be more to look at and more difference between those CVs. As well as that, I also think it's going to be really important to educate any paralegals that you have working in your business who want to self-fund themselves through the SQE and use qualifying work experience or time to count, and see that as a quick route to gain qualification then, or an NQ role within your business. If that doesn't align with your business needs, or they don't quite fit that criteria, that level that you need to make that really clear to them and manage their expectations accordingly. And also for those continuing with traditional training contracts and that format, it's really thinking about how are you going to make that more attractive. You know, the education rich pathway that you want people to follow, how are you going to make that more attractive to those individuals who may just be looking to qualify and assume there's a role at the end of it? So those are the things to flag really, and I think awareness and education will be key to those.
Thank you ever so much, Claire. That was great. And we'll move on to our final panelist before we go into the Q&A. And that's Nicole Poole, who is a policy advisor in the education and training team at the Law Society. She has extensive experience in this area of work, having worked on the Legal and Education Training Review previously, as well as the current Training for Tomorrow programme. And Nicole also works closely with the Law Society's Education and Training Committee. So over to you, Nicole.
Thank you for having me. I will keep this brief because I think a lot of the points that I would have raised have been raised by everyone else already. What I would say is that the Law Society has always viewed the practical stage of training as invaluable to those entering the profession and to the reputation of the profession as a whole. QWE provides this in an increasingly flexible way. I think it's going to be up to the profession what use they make of that and how they engage with that. Obviously, we welcome the guidance that the SRA has provided recently. That's been really great to see, and I think has answered a lot of the questions that people have had over the previous couple of years, particularly around sign-off and people's responsibilities around that. I think what the next stage for us is we're engaging with the profession as always, looking to see where people need assistance, where people have questions, and how best we can go about supporting the profession to engage with this, but also supporting those seeking to enter the profession. And in doing so, we're working with the SRA, but also with the Junior Lawyers Division, particularly around trainees, transition arrangements, how people engage with QWE, and so forth.
Okay, thank you very much, Nicole. And I'm just looking at the flurry of questions that are coming in here. So I think let's kick off with some of those. And I think, Richard, most of them will probably be for you to pick up first, but then we can bring other panelists in as you see fit, so to speak. And so one of the first questions we have is around, does qualifying work experience have to cover all areas of law to be tested in the SQE? For example, what if I'm working in a niche area as a law firm?
I think really the answer to that is that, it doesn't have to cover absolutely every single competence in the statement of solicitor competence to be classified as qualifying work experience. The way that we've positioned it is that individuals should have exposure to some or a number or all of those competencies. So really it's up to you as an organization, I suppose, to think about what it is that your placement can offer in terms of exposure to those competencies, and perhaps from an individual's perspective to think, actually, okay, what is it I can get from this particular placement? And given the full range of competencies that might well be assessed in the SQE2, do I need to get any exposure to any other competencies from another placement, for example?
Thank you, Richard. And another sort of question on a similar theme. We've got quite a few questions along the lines of, can I specify that a new employee must do 2 years with my firm before I sign it off if I don't feel perhaps the past experience they've gained delivering legal services was good enough?
I think that's really a matter for that particular organisation. I think what is important here, and I know we've had a number of other questions around this, is, anyone that's offering qualifying work experience as a placement, I think should be absolutely clear at the beginning of that placement that it is going to constitute a qualifying work experience placement, and the likely competencies that an individual might well be exposed to. And I think what that does is to be very clear to someone who might want to take that placement what is involved, and manages their expectations. But also it helps, I suppose, reduce any kind of disagreements around sign off further down the line, if expectations have been clearly articulated from the very start of a placement.
And that was the point you were making, Mary, wasn't it, around that conversations? And I suppose from your experience, Mary, of dealing with firms, a whole range of firms on a daily basis, any further thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I completely agree with Richard, and I think it has to be done on a really case-by-case basis. And we have placements where, for example, a paralegal is brought in to help bundle or paginate, where it might not count towards qualifying work experience. But then we also have a placement where they're going in and drafting letters or drafting witness statements or doing similar work to a trainee, where it should be counted as qualifying work experience. So it is going to have to be a case-by-case, task-by-task review. And so having those conversations up front is going to be really important for paralegals joining, as well as for firms to set and manage expectations, because firms don't want paralegals complaining to the SRA that someone's not signing off on their QWE. So managing that expectation up front, I think, is absolutely key.
Can I just chip in as well?
Yeah,
I was just going to add something to that, and that, the paralegal role in organisations like my own is so important and so vital to the way that we operate and the way that we work. So you don't want to undermine that at all. It's a professional qualification in itself, but it's communicating well with those paralegals, isn't it? And again, not having them think that it necessarily is always towards qualification to become a solicitor. It's not always going to fit with the business need, and therefore, again, communication is going to be just so important, isn't it, to manage expectations?
And Claire, that's a really interesting point, isn't it? Because there may be some paralegals will see this as a sort of an opportunity to qualify, and some firms may take the view, yes, this paralegal, this is the chance to actually, maybe we couldn't offer them a training contract, but we could identify them to qualify for this route. But as you rightly say, everyone might not be in that boat. Is that something DWF's thinking pretty carefully about at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I spoke about awareness and education. I think one of the sets of people who we need to be really clear with and educate are the partners in our business, who obviously want to support individuals who work within their teams and support those individuals with their aspirations. But we also need to be very clear about the needs of the business too. And so it's going to be specific individuals rather than a tidal wave that we would want to support down a solicitor route. I think this will be a quandary for a lot of businesses.
Yeah, which is why it's worth thinking about now, rather than, I suppose, waiting and then trying to answer the question when your first paralegal or someone comes to you wanting qualifying work experience. Just another question to pick up, and anyone can chip in on this one. We've had a question saying, is it realistic that firms will offer roles to people who have not done a full 2 years at that firm? So if they've got their qualifying work experience elsewhere. Anyone want to, is it realistic? Any views on that?
I would say it is realistic.
Okay, question answered. There we go.
Yeah, I think it's to do with whether or not there's a role in the business, and then looking at who's best suited to do that, and some succession planning as well. But I don't think having part of your qualifying work experience outside of your organisation will be seen negatively. But again, it's that where you have formal training contracts, people who you're still bringing in on a training contract basis, you would want them to do those full 2 years, because that's going to be an education rich pathway that you've made within your business. So there's a difference.
No, that's good. Richard, do you want to add something on that point?
Yeah, I suppose it's just a responsibility on the individual themselves to think about how they can also evidence experience in previous organisations. It could be through our template, or maybe something that Mayor is developing. But if they're kind of moving from placement to placement, it'd be good to have a kind of a record that enables them to sort of demonstrate, well, at this organisation I had exposure to all of these competencies, because I think that's going to help to address some of the issues that we've identified as part of this question.
And it's interesting, isn't it? I imagine it will vary from firm to firm. A very bespoke niche firm may be looking for a particular candidate, whereas other firms will actually be very open to, we just want to get the best and most talented people in, so we don't want to limit ourselves. Nicole, could I come to you for a moment? I know you're obviously having a lot of conversations with firms about qualifying work experience. Do these sort of questions resonate, and what would be your advice for firms in thinking about this QWE?
I think a lot of these queries or questions that are being raised are things that we are having feedback from firms. I think it just emphasises the degree to which we need to be stepping up our support to the profession. So things like, would you employ somebody who's done their training elsewhere? Well, there's no reason not to, but what do you need to see from that person in order to feel secure in that decision? And I think that is the kind of things that we need to be looking to understand and to kind of provide information on to firms so that they can make those decisions. The SQE is only going to be as flexible as people use it. And I think that is one of the key barriers. We want people to use it as flexibly as possible so that the full equality, diversity, inclusion benefits can be reached. And I think in order to do that, firms are going to need a lot of support, because it is going to be a change in mindset. I think some of the other things that firms have been raising with us is around using the apprenticeship levy and how they would do that to cover training costs, essentially having a graduate apprenticeship for QWE, and that's something that we're looking at with the Education and Training Committee and how we would provide guidance on that. And the other thing is, just concerns about how it will work in practice, and I think it will be a gradual evolution from the training contract, and part of that is through the transitional arrangements, which give people the breathing space to see how this could work in practice. And I think that we'll see people gradually move across and feel confident in the new system.
And it's correct, isn't it, to say that the greater flexibility around qualifying work experience is where the opportunity is, but obviously that raises more questions than perhaps the more prescriptive training contracts. Lucy, could I perhaps come to you, because one thing we haven't covered so far is the law clinic angle, and law clinics actually are grappling with different types of questions around how they take account of time worked for qualifying work experience and whether they should do. What would your advice be for law clinics, and what you're hearing from the people you speak to?
So it kind of echoes the themes that we've been mentioning previously about the requirement for consistency and clarity right from the start. University law clinics are going to have different issues in relation to firms, because it's going to be highly unlikely that a candidate will be able to do a full 2 years worth of qualifying work experience within a university law clinic. And so it needs to be very clear at the outset what that clinic can offer. And also, there are so many different types of university law clinic model, whether or not it's an education-based model or a pure pro bono model, how long it's run, is it run over an academic year, over a semester, and also whether or not clinics use simulation exercises, which we know don't go towards qualifying work experience. So it is again going to be very much on a case-by-case basis as to how clinics can gauge the amount of time. We are working on providing guidance on time spent in law clinics, because we do recognise that that is going to be the main challenge. But what I would also mention is that, again, I think clinics especially have to be really clear what is on offer to students. And this kind of links back to this point a bit about the niche law firms, is that it's got to be very clear, the competencies which a student is going to have the opportunity to develop. So that's got to be made really clear. But I think also clinics have to do a bit of self-reflection to see whether or not the activities that they are providing actually do give the opportunity to develop the competencies. So just because you run a law clinic might not necessarily mean that there's qualifying work experience that can be signed off.
Thank you, Lucy. And I'm just looking at one question we've had come in, which I think is probably for you, Richard. Is there a cut-off for when historic experience can be counted? Oh, you're on mute. Sorry, Richard.
That was bound to happen at some stage, wasn't it? I was hoping it wasn't me. Anyway, in terms of kind of cut-off, we've been quite clear that you can use previous experience as qualifying work experience, subject to having that experience signed off by a solicitor and meeting the criteria involved in that. So, we haven't prescribed a particular cut-off time, so it's really up to a particular individual. But I would get them certainly to think, the individual to think about, can they evidence it? Because someone will have to sign it off. Who is going to sign it off? If we're kind of talking about a good many number of years ago. Is the organisation still around? And if it's, if there isn't anyone in the organisation who had direct experience of their work, who else could sign it off? So whilst it is kind of possible, there are some things an individual might want to consider in doing so.
Thank you, Richard. And perhaps a question, sort of more general question around, we've talked around quite a lot of the practicalities around sign off, but where, and maybe I'll come to you on this first, Mary, where do you think the opportunities are for firms out of this? Because there are opportunities.
There are definite opportunities in that, I suppose, the pool of NQs or qualified lawyers is hopefully going to grow. So in terms of business need, often you're restricted with where trainees want to qualify and where you put trainees. So having another pool of talent that you can dip into at a kind of NQ or qualified level will be useful for firms. And I see a real opportunity with the in-house market as well. Providing different routes to qualification should also provide the opportunity to gain the best talent. So you'll have some students who want to earn while they learn, and law firms being able to offer this as a route through the SQE is fantastic as well. There's also an opportunity in terms of cost for law firms, because the SQE will be substantially less expensive compared to the traditional training contract route after the GDL, LPC and maintenance fees. So that also needs to be considered from a firm perspective too.
Does anyone else want to come in on the opportunities, Claire or Nicole or Lucy?
Yeah, I think I'd just support what Mary said. I think it's fantastic that students, trainees will be given a wage if the SQE is done via the apprenticeship route from the point of study. and I think that's the right way to go. So I think that's a great opportunity. And yeah, again, it's matching that qualifying work experience and being able to specialise as soon as possible in an organisation.
Yeah, thank you, Claire. And Lucy, perhaps I could come to you in terms of universities. Do you think we're going to see a shift in sort of what universities offer as courses? And will things like law clinics or sandwich years become more important from now on in, and a sort of a sales point for, or do you think it will vary from uni to uni?
I think that it will vary from university to university. I think that from my point of view, as someone who's a legal academic who specialises in clinical legal education, that the growth in law clinics with the advent of QWE is something that I would hope for. I think it adds up for a sustainability argument. I think that in relation to the broader offering of universities, I think it's very much a case of it depends what they offered previously, because some universities did offer postgraduate training and others didn't. So I think it's going to be a period of time where the higher education market is just going to start to settle, but I'm sure that there'll be varying offerings.
Thank you, Lucy. So a question for you, Richard, that's come in, which is, do firms have to recognise someone as a solicitor if they pass the SQE and they're drawing on qualifying work experience gained elsewhere?
I mean, technically speaking, the individual will be a solicitor because they've met all the criteria of the SQE. But I think really it's a matter for firms and organisations of what they call their employees. To be perfectly honest, if they want to call them, solicitors or any other roles, that's really a matter for them.
Claire, did you want to add to that?
Well, it was to say, our experiences, we already have some of our paralegals asking us about the SQE route and telling us that they will self-fund, which is, fantastic and great for them. But out of fairness, we have to be really clear with them about whether or not they've got the right expectation. So an entry level into the paralegal work at DWF is a career level 8, whereas point of qualification we set at career level 5. So we have to be fair with people and say, if you do qualify, that's great, but the work that you'll be given at this moment is still going to be paralegal work. That's still how we're going to be charging you out. And there would be some more education and training required if you wanted to go for an NQ role at DWF. So that's I think it's about being very fair and making sure people know what the expectations are so that they can manage accordingly.
Nicole, you're nodding your head at that, and I suppose if we could bring you in, sort of, expectations obviously vital. How's the Law Society going to be supporting both the profession and also those entering the profession in this space?
I think it's a conversation that we've already been having quite a lot with the profession around, from firms, a fear that one of their paralegals would go off and qualify through the SQE and come back and say, well, actually, now you've got to double my pay and employ me as a solicitor. And, fears from the junior lawyers division that the pinch point has been moved from the training contract to the newly qualified, and that you have all these newly qualified solicitors who won't be able to find work. And I think, a lot of this is clarity, setting expectations, and we'll certainly be looking at how we speak to people about the SQE and making clear to people, this is what it is. You need to evidence your QWE. You need to show what you've done in order to get a newly qualified position. And I think that's something we're going to be looking at really carefully.
I mean, I'd be curious to know panelists' views actually on the key points coming through is this conversations and expectations. But I suppose this isn't something that should be entirely new, because that actually is an issue with the training contracts. I mean, I've heard anecdotally that the quality of training contracts can vary from firm to firm. Is that it? And obviously, if you were taking a training contract at a firm, you'd want to have a conversation. What are people's views on that? Mary, perhaps you deal with a lot of people in this space.
Sure, I was going to say exactly that, Ben. Even people's CVs, you have to put down what work what skills you've got and what work you've done, and try and explain a kind of work portfolio of your previous experience, even at the paralegal level, trying to get a training contract. So having more detail around that and comparing it to the competency statement and making it more reflective is just a kind of small development on what's already being looked at. In terms of different training contracts, you're absolutely right. I have friends who were doing photocopying for 6 months, and that was signed off as acceptable, and other firms where it wouldn't have been. So having this kind of standard in the SQE exam, which is the actual test, it is key to keep the standard even across the board. And it's kind of comes back to Richard's initial point. This is to have the opportunity to gain that skill. And if someone can show that the work that they're doing is in line with the competency from that solicitor's competency statement, you can sign off saying they've had the opportunity to get that, not that they've actually achieved that skill, which will be tested in the SQE2.
And that really is a key point, isn't it? That you're not signing off whether someone is the most competent or best person ever, but it's that opportunity. Lucy, you were nodding your head, and I don't know whether nodding your head means you've got something to say. So yes.
No, I was just nodding because, especially with clinics, I think this was one of the was the concern about is the solicitor signing off making a judgment about the work that has happened. And I think what's become very clear, and the message is certainly being filtered out, that it's not, that's the role of the SQE2. It is the opportunity to develop those competencies. But rather than sounding like a broken record, we've just got to make sure that those particular competencies are explicitly clear from the outset.
And Claire, you were nodding your head as well, so I'm going to go around all the head nodders. No one will nod their head from now on, in case I. So, do you want something to add to that?
No, it was just to agree with Lucy, which was why I was nodding my head. I think I've mentioned education a few times, and I think educating the partners in your business who will be signing, or the solicitors in your business who potentially will be signing off the qualifying work experience, it's just so important that they understand what these terms mean and the nuances there. So
perhaps I'll come to you, Richard, with another practical question, but it builds upon what we were just talking about there. And it's will the SRA advise if qualifying work experience is accepted or not, or is it a given if it is signed off, it is approved?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and I suppose it shines a light on the kind of the process of submitting, or kind of telling us that a period of qualifying work experience has been completed. As I said in my slides, that will be available from spring sort of next year, so we'll have further information on it. But I think as a general principle, we expect that anyone who's had their qualifying work experience signed off in accordance with the kind of criteria that we've set out, that is accurate, that there are kind of no character and suitability issues, and if there are, what are they, as well as there being an exposure to some of the competencies. If that's been signed off, then we are comfortable with that. We certainly won't be looking on a case-by-case basis at individuals' kind of records and learning development records. The emphasis is really on that individual signing it off. Should there be a problem at the sign-off stage, we'll no doubt let individuals know. Because the way in which it will work is that obviously, an individual will submit their qualifying work experience and tell us, who is the person signing it off, and we will contact them just to verify that. So if there is an issue, we'll obviously feed that back to the specific individual. But if we do a lot of what we're talking about now, have those early conversations, manage expectations, be clear on what competencies are being exposed to, be clear on what is being signed off, have those regular discussions between the person signing off and the person undertaking qualifying work experience, there really shouldn't be too much of an issue at that point of sign off.
Thank you, Richard. And I suppose I wanted to put another question out there and get people's views on. There is a risk with the training contract at the moment that if you get one, you've sort of got the golden ticket, but then whatever happens with the quality of that training contract, you'll just get through the 2 years so you can qualify. Is there an argument that qualifying work experience empowers individuals? Because actually, if you've started work in a firm, you've had certain expectations, and actually it's really not cutting the mustard, you can potentially move on more easily and try and get qualifying work experience elsewhere. Is that a valid argument, or is that do you think in reality that won't happen? Anyone want to come in on that one?
I'm happy to speak again.
Thank you, Claire.
Yeah, it was really just to say, I think in businesses where you've got training contracts as a path to qualification, you tend to also have alternate routes, and I think as a pathway, as an option, and I think that will continue in those businesses. So there will always be at least two streams to qualification, and as Mary said, it's quite healthy to have different routes to get down that qualification pathway, but it kind of depends on the individual which one is the right path to take, and it's to do with their context and their aspirations. Certainly the training contract, I would like to see that continue, because I think that's an opportunity for an organisation to create that pathway where someone can really get to know the organisation and understand what those end points will be.
I'm also, Ben, just to chip in there, I think you get some paralegals who are desperate to be, or lawyers who know where they want to specialise and have always known that from the experience that they have already done. So for them, being able to kind of choose that path and really push to keep getting the same experience in IP or commercial, there is a real opportunity to kind of build your own training contract, as long as it's meeting the SQE2 competency examination. So from that sense, it's opening up a more flexible career as well, rather than having to move around. But then you have others like me who didn't know which area they wanted to do, so benefited from moving around a law firm and trying out different things. So I definitely see this flexibility offering more opportunity into different ways to qualify.
Yeah. Nicole, did you have any views on that?
I think the key point behind it is that there is the flexibility, and I think the more routes into the profession that you have, and the more opportunities for people to take their own path into the profession, the better. I think at the moment there is a little bit of kind of one size fits all. There isn't. I mean, there are multiple paths at the moment. We've always supported those, but I think firms tend to pick. You do your 2 years. You still do 4 seats usually, and I think the profession will be better for having a breadth of people in it, and the best way to do that, especially from an EDI perspective, is to have multiple routes and multiple ways in which people can engage with entering the profession.
No, I think that's a good point, and we know that the current training contract, if you're, say, have caring responsibilities, or you're a mature student who perhaps wants to switch into the law, the training contract doesn't often lend itself that well to qualifying as a solicitor. Richard, we've had another question come in, which is quite a practical one, which is, are there restrictions on who can be signing off another's qualifying work experience? We've got a scenario here of a newly qualified solicitor who immediately signs off their friends. Well, I think we'd probably be looking fairly closely at that, wouldn't we?
Certainly that question may have come from a potential solicitor looking for a loophole in qualifying work experience already. So it's a good question. It's a valid question. I think, you're right, we would be looking very closely at that, and actually the guidance that we've put out last week is pretty clear that, where there is a conflict of interest, we would expect an individual not to be signing off in those circumstances, because there is a conflict of interest, and actually, solicitors are under a wider obligation to kind of act honest, act with integrity, kind of be ethical, and kind of signing off an individual perhaps without direct experience of their qualifying work experience payments, isn't in line with those kind of regulatory obligations.
Thank you, Richard. And I'm aware we're just as the night draws in outside where I'm sitting, we're coming to the end of the session. So I'd like to just finish off with one final question for the panelists. And perhaps, Lucy, I'll come to you first on this one. I suppose no one knows exactly how qualifying work experience and these reforms will pan out, and that's one of the reasons the SRA is really committed to evaluating this and doing the surveys, etc., that Richard mentioned. But where would you hope, in a sort of positive case scenario, we are in around 5 years' time or so? What's one of the big impacts you'd like to see this having? And other panelists can think about that question before we finish.
I think from my point of view, I would like to see the work that is being done in university law clinics really now recognised by employers to the level that it actually does count now towards qualifying work experience, whereas lots of employers recognise that it is very good experience, whereas now we have the opportunity to actually allow students to build that into their training portfolio. So that's what I would really hope for the next few years.
Thank you, Lucy. Could I come to you, Nicole, with the same question?
Yeah, I think it's probably what I was just saying. I think that we'd hope that people would, in 5 years' time, have confidence, not just in QWE, but in the SQE standard, a standard for entry to the profession that they could rely on. That would mean that firms had the confidence to employ a range of people that they perhaps hadn't gone to the usual universities that firm recruits from, or that people can go through the apprenticeship route and that be seen as an equal route into the profession as a more traditional training contract. And I think, in 5 years' time, hopefully we'll have that confidence.
Thank you, Nicole. Claire, perhaps if I come to you, hopefully in 5 years' time, perhaps you'll still get a student discount, but what else do you would you like to see?
Well, one of the drivers for the SQE when these consultations started, several years ago now, was around diversity and inclusion and around social mobility particularly. And that's one that's really close to my own heart. And I think that's the result I'd like to see. I'd like to see more diversity within the profession, and I'd like this to support social mobility, certainly. And I think the apprenticeship route is a good one, and I hope that those ambitions play out.
Thank you, Claire. And Mary, if we come to you.
Yeah, so I would completely agree with all these points, and to add on to them, I suppose at the moment 60% of people don't go to a law firm or lawyer to resolve their legal issues. So we've got a huge problem of consumers not trusting or having enough access to lawyers. So developing on all these points, wouldn't it be great if more people used lawyers or legal services and had access to legal services to solve their legal issues?
Oh, I think we've just... Sorry, Mary, I don't know whether I just lost a bit of you there. Do you just want to repeat that last point?
Oh, sure. So I don't know how much was caught then, but I suppose providing another path to qualification hopefully will allow more people to use lawyers to resolve their legal issues and provide a kind of wider range of access to the profession for consumers to help resolve legal issues. It's kind of building on all the points, but summarising it from a consumer perspective.
Yeah, thank you. No, that was great, and I think not forgetting consumers in all this, and the real challenge around getting access to expert legal advice, which we all know the figures are really low, is a really important challenge that I think we can all agree needs to be addressed and improved. And Richard, so finally, can I come to you?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with the fact that hopefully in 5 years' time we'll see this kind of change in recruitment culture within organisations that enables you kind of the freedoms and flexibilities of qualifying work experience that we've talked about to be played out. But I think from, I suppose, kind of an SRA perspective, I think we'd like to see quite a vibrant community of interest here. Lots of organisations working, sharing ideas, addressing challenges collaboratively. So we can really embed qualifying work experience as kind of within organisations and within their cultures, and we move away from some of perhaps the kind of concerns that we've discussed today.
Well, I always like moving on from concerns, Richard. So that will be the note we will finish the conference on. Really good opportunities around qualifying work experience. I'd like to thank everybody and all the speakers for their contributions, not only in this session, but also across the whole day. I'd like to give a shout out to thanks to Matt, who's been running all the technicals. He's done a superb job on making this look such an excellent production and doing all the sound. Also, thank you to Catherine for pulling the event together. It's been a long day, but I'd also like to thank everyone who's joined us for sessions and those who've stuck with us. You enjoyed the 43 different acronyms we've gone through, asked questions, and also anyone who's input on the development of the SQE more generally over the last few years, which has been vital actually in helping us improve and refine our approach. We'll try to pick out factual questions we haven't been able to answer today. We'll either publish on the events page, or some of them are very specific to a person's circumstances. So otherwise, we'll try and get a personal reply to you. We'll also publish slides and resources on the events page, so look out for that. Finally, and you'll be bored of me saying this, but we do want to know what you've thought of today, what you found useful, what could be improved. Hopefully we will be able to meet in 3D again soon. I miss your 3D selves, but in the meantime, we would also like to know how you found this virtual format. So click on the link below and let us know. Otherwise, thank you again, and I very much hope everyone has a safe and enjoyable festive break. So thank you.